Okay, so now we're getting into the dream vision, which this is something that I'm gonna put a few comments here and there just to guide you through this. So most of you, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. Some of you probably, even if you've never heard this, you might just be like, oh yeah, he's talking about Noah. Oh yeah, he's talking about the fallen angels. Oh yeah, he's talking about Abraham. Oh yeah, this is definitely the 12 patriarchs. But just for maybe the few out there that may not understand as we read this, I just want to make it clear what we're talking about here. So this is a dream vision that Yahuwah gave Enoch, and basically Enoch dreamed the entire world from beginning to end with a dream, and instead of people, he uses different animals and different explanations, just different animals to explain this dream and what happens. So this is extremely, and this is such a blessing to see Yahuwah record the end from the beginning. After this I saw another dream, and I will show the whole dream to thee, my son. And Enoch lifted up his voice and spake to his son Methuselah, to thee, my son, will I speak. Hear my words. Incline thine ear to the dream vision of thy father. Before I took thy mother Edna, I saw in a vision on my bed, and behold, a bull came forth from the earth, Adam. And that bull was white. And after it came forth a heifer. Along with this latter came forth 2 bulls, Cain and Abel. One of them black and the other red. And that black bull, Cain, gored the red one, Abel, and pursued him over the earth. And thereupon I could no longer see that red bull, Abel, dying, the first murder. But that black bull, Cain, grew, and that heifer went with him. Probably one of his daughters that wasn't mentioned. And I saw that many oxen proceeded from him, which resembled and followed him. And that cow, that first one, went from the presence of that first bull in order to seek the red one. This is Eve leaving to try to seek Abel, but found him not, and lamented with a great lamentation over him, and sought him. And I looked till that first bull came to her, Adam came to Eve, and quieted her, and from that time onward she cried no more. And after that she bore another white bull, Seth. And after him she bore many bulls and black cows. And I saw in my sleep that white bull likewise grow and become a great white bull, and from him proceeded many white bulls, and they resembled him. This is the righteous lineage from Adam to Seth downwards. And they resembled him, and they began to beget many white bulls, which resembled them, following the other, even many. 86. And again I saw with mine eyes as I slept, and I saw that heaven above, and behold, a star fell from heaven. This is Hasatan. And it arose and eat and pastured among those oxen. And after that I saw the large and black oxen, and behold, they all changed their stalls and pastures and their cattle, and began to live with each other. And again I saw in the vision, and I looked towards the heaven, and behold, I saw many stars descend and cast themselves down from the heaven to that first star. So this is the watchers now coming down, with Hasatan. And they became, so these stars, and they became bulls amongst those cattle, and pastured with them amongst them. And I looked at them and saw, and behold, they all let out their privy members. This is their, this is their manly parts. They're not men, but it says they have, reproduction organs. So, and behold, they all let out their privy members like horses, and they began to cover the cows of the oxen, and they all became pregnant and bare elephants and camels and asses. So these elephants, camels, and asses, right? These are the giants. Not saying that we're going to see elephants, camels, and asses later in the stream. Not saying that those will be them, but it's just showing like different generations. And all the oxen feared them and were affrighted of them. So men, the oxen are shown as men. So all the oxen feared them and were affrighted at them, at the giants, and began to bite with their teeth and devour, and to gore there with their horns. And they began moreover to devour those oxen, right? So the giants ate the men. And behold, all the children of the earth began to tremble and quake before them, and to flee from them. 87. And again, I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. And I raised mine eyes again to heaven, and I saw in the vision, and behold, there came forth from heaven beings who were like white men. These are good angels. And four went forth from that place, and 3 with them. And those three that had last come forth grasped me by my hand and took me up. This is them taking Enoch up, away from the generations of the earth, and raised me up to a lofty place, and showed me a tower raised high above the earth, and all the hills were lower. And said unto me, Remain here till thou seest everything that befalls those elephants, camels, and asses, and the stars, and oxen, and all of them. They're preparing him to see the flood. And I saw one of those 4 who had come forth first, and he seized that first star which had fallen from heaven and bound it hand and foot. We read about this in Enoch 10 last time, that this was Azazel. They bound him hand and foot and cast him into the desert, which is called Dudaim, and cast into an abyss. Now that abyss was narrow and deep and horrible and dark. And one of them drew a sword and gave it to those elephants and camels and asses. And we read about this in the first part, when basically war was incited between all the giants, and they basically fought each other in these great wars, like huge wars. Like what I don't watch movies anymore, but for those of us that have seen movies like Lord of the Rings, you know, these huge, like massive battles. That's what was going on. And they began to smite each other, and the whole earth quaked because of them. And as I was beholding the vision, lo, one of those 4 who had come forth stoned them from heaven, and gathered and took all the great stars, whose privy members were like those of horses, and bound them all hand and foot, and cast them into an abyss of the earth. This is the binding and casting in prison of the watchers, the 200. Okay, 89. And one of those 4 went to that white bull and instructed him in secret, without, this is Noah, right? Without his being terrified. He was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel, the ark, and dwelt thereon. And 3 bulls dwelt with him, this is his 3 sons, in that vessel, and they were covered in. And again I raised mine eyes toward heaven, and saw a lofty roof with 7 water torrents thereon. This is the water torrents of heaven, because it says, the scripture says in Genesis, that there was waters above and waters below. So the flood not only let the floodgates of heaven with water come down, but also from below, with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. Right, into an enclosure. Not saying this is perfect, but you got the waters above and the waters below, and the water filled in that enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water, and the water, the darkness and mist increased upon it. And I looked at the height of that water. That water had risen above the height of that enclosure, and it was streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together, until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water. But that vessel, the ark, floated on the water, while all the oxen and elephants and camels and asses sank to the bottom with all the animals, so that I could no longer see them. But they were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. And again I saw in the vision till those water torrents were removed from that high roof, and the chasms of the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these, till the earth became visible. But that vessel settled on the earth, and the darkness retired, and light appeared. But that white bull, which had become a man, Noah, came out of that vessel, the ark, and 3 bulls with him. That's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And one of those 3 was white like that bull, and one of them was red as blood, and one of them black. Now what's interesting is, even science will admit that everybody on this earth right now came from either a white man, a red man, or a black man. And this is, black is, the African race. Red is what they would consider the Asian race, and the white race. So this is confirmed by modern genealogy. So a white bull. So again, and 3 bulls with him, and one of those 3 was white like that bull. So one was white like Noah, and one of them was red, and one of them was black, and that white bull departed from them. And none of this has anything to do with any racism or who's superior or whatever. Just this is what the scriptures say, right? We also know that it doesn't matter whether we came from this white bull, a red bull, or a black bull. We are all one in Messiah, Yahusha. We are the seed of Abraham, the true seed, through faith in the Word, which is Messiah, Yahusha. As we learn from Galatians 3:27 through 29. And they began to bring forth beasts of the field and birds, so that there arose different generations: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, and vultures, and kites, and eagles, and ravens. And among them was born a white bull. This is Abraham. So all these different generations. This is like the dispersion. This is the Tower of Babel. Different races, people mixing, whatever. And so from among them was born a white bull. This is where we learn about Abraham. And they began to bite one another. But that white bull, which was born amongst them, begat a wild ass. This is Ishmael. And a white bull with it, Isaac. And the wild asses multiplied. This is the sons of Ishmael. This is the Arabic race. This is what we now know as Muslim races. But that bull, which was born from him, begat a black wild boar. This is Esau. And a white sheep, Jacob. And the former begat many boars, Esau. This is Edom. But that sheep begat 12 sheep. This is your 12 patriarchs. So the white sheep begat those 12 sheep. Or I'm sorry, begat 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses. This is when they gave up Joseph to the Ishmaelites, the wild asses. And those asses again gave up that sheep to the wolves. This is Egyptians. And that sheep grew up among the wolves. And Yahweh brought the 11 sheep to live with it. This is when the Israelites, this is when the rest of the Israelites that were living in Canaan came to Egypt when the famine came in the land of Egypt, right? So, and Yahweh brought the 11 sheep to live with it and pasture with it among the wolves, the Egyptians. And they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. And the wolves began to fear them, and they oppressed them until they destroyed their little ones, right? So this is the oppression in Egypt. And they cast their young into a river of much water. This is them throwing the babies into the Nile. But those sheep began to cry aloud on account of their little ones, and to complain unto Yahweh. And a sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild asses. There's Moses. And I saw the sheep, how they lamented and cried, and besought Yahweh with all their might, till Yahweh of that sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a lofty abode. This is when I believe that Yahusha, the word, came down and was in the fiery bush, the burning bush, right, and spoke to Moses. And I believe that Yahusha was was called the angel of Yahweh, which he was the pillar of cloud, the fire by night. And he brought them out, right? They were brought out with a mighty hand. Yahusha is the right hand of Yahweh. He's the word. And came to them and pastured them. And he called that sheep which had escaped to the wolves, Moses, and spake with it concerning the wolves, that it should admonish them not to touch the sheep, right? This is when he told Moses to go to Pharaoh to, let my people go. And the sheep went to the wolves according to the word of Yahweh, right? The word of Yahweh is Messiah, Yahusha. And another sheep met it, Aaron, and went with it. And these two, Moses and Aaron, went and entered together into the assembly of those wolves, the Egyptians, and spake with them, and admonished them not to touch the sheep from henceforth. And thereupon I saw the wolves, and how they oppressed the sheep exceedingly with all their power. This is the oppression of the Israelites. And the sheep cried aloud. And Yahweh came to the sheep, and they began to smite those wolves, right, the plagues. And the wolves began to make lamentation, but the sheep became quiet forthwith and ceased to cry out. And I saw the sheep till they departed from the wolves, the Exodus. But the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and those wolves departed in pursuit of the sheep with all their power. And Yahweh of the sheep went with them as their leader, and all his sheep followed him, and his face was dazzling and glorious and terrible to behold. But the wolves began to pursue those sheep till they reached a sea of water, and that sea was divided, and the water stood on this side and on that before their face. I think you all can see that this is the parting of the Red Sea. And there Yahweh led them and placed their Adonai led them and placed them himself between them and the wolves. This is when he was keeping them back with the tornadoes or whirlwinds or whatever was going on. And as those wolves did not yet see the sheep, they proceeded into the midst of that sea, and the wolves followed the sheep. And those wolves ran after them into the sea. And when they saw Yahweh of the sheep, they turned to flee before his face, but that sea gathered itself together. This is the Red Sea coming back together, and became as it had been created. And the water swelled, and it rose till it covered those wolves. And I saw till all the wolves who pursued those sheep perished and were drowned. But the sheep escaped from that water and went forth into a wilderness where there was no water and no grass, and they began to open their eyes and to see. And I saw the Adonai of that sheep pasturing them and giving them water and grass, and that sheep going and leading them, right? So this is the manna, this is the quail, this is the striking of the rock, giving them water. And that sheep ascended to the summit of that lofty rock, Moses going up to Mount Sinai, and the Adonai of that sheep sent it to them. And after that I saw the Adonai of the sheep who was, I'll say his name. I saw Yahweh of the sheep who stood before them, and his appearance was great and terrible and majestic. And all those sheep saw him and were afraid before his face, right? This is the lightning and thunder and the quaking. And this is when everybody was like, oh no, we don't want to hear the voice of Yahweh. Moses, he speak to you and you speak to us. And they all feared and trembled because of him, and they all cried out to that sheep with them, which was amongst them, we are not able to stand before our Yahweh, or to behold him. And that sheep which led them again ascended to the summit of that rock, but the sheep began to be blinded and to wander from the way which he had showed them. Right? And this is when they made the golden calf, and to already go astray, because Moses was when Moshe was on the Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. But that sheep, what not thereof, and Yahweh of the sheep was wrathful exceedingly against them, and that sheep discovered it, and went down from the summit of the rock, and came to the sheep, and found the greatest part of them blinded and fallen away. Right? This is when he came down and broke the 10 Commandments, the tablets. And when they saw it, they feared and trembled at its presence, and desired to return to their folds. And that sheep took other sheep with it, and came to those sheep which had fallen away, and began to slay them. And so this is when Moses drew the line in the sand, and this is when was it 3,000 were killed that day? And the sheep feared its presence, and thus that sheep brought back those sheep that had fallen away, and they returned to their folds. And I saw this in this vision till that sheep became a man and built a house for Yahweh of the sheep. This is the meeting place in the wilderness. This is the tabernacle in the wilderness, and placed all the sheep in that house. And I saw till this sheep which had met that sheep which led them fell asleep, and this is the perishing of Moses and Aaron. And I saw till all the great sheep perished, and the little ones arose in their place. This is the wicked generation dying in the wilderness, and all the little ones, right, their children, arose in their place. And they came to a pasture, this is the promised land, and approached the stream of water, the river Jordan. Then that sheep, their leader, which had become a man. Okay, I'm sorry. So this one was Aaron dying. Then that their sheep, their leader, which had become a man, Moshe, withdrew from them and fell asleep. And all the sheep sought it and cried over it with a great crying. And I saw till they left off the crying for that sheep and crossed that stream of water. This is when Joshua led them, crossing over Jordan. And there arose the 2 sheep as leaders. This is Joshua and Caleb. There was the 2 sheep as leaders in the place of which had them fallen asleep. And I saw till the sheep came to a goodly place, and a pleasant and glorious land. This is the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, the inheritance. And I saw till those sheep were satisfied, and that house stood amongst them in the pleasant land. This is that tabernacle standing in Shiloh. And sometimes their eyes were opened, and sometimes blinded. This is the days of the judges, right? So they went astray, and then a judge brought them back. And then they went astray, and then a judge brought them back. Till another sheep arose and led them and brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. And the dogs and the foxes and all the wild boars began to devour those sheep till Yahweh the sheep raised up another sheep. This is the time of like the Philistines, the Midian, you know, all just pursuing after Israel. This is the days of like Samson, the days of Gideon. And a ram from their midst, which led them. Now this is Saul. This is King Saul, right? So the Adonai, Yahweh of the sheep, raised up another sheep, a ram from their midst, which led them. And that ram began to butt on either side of those dogs and foxes and wild boars till he had destroyed them all. And that sheep whose eyes were opened and saw that ram, this is Samuel, which was amongst the sheep till it forsook its glory. So this is the ram forsaking its glory, not Samuel. This is Saul going astray, right, forsook its glory. It began to butt those sheep and trampled upon them and behaved itself unseemly. And Yahweh of the sheep sent the lamb, this is Shemuel, sent the lamb, Samuel, to another lamb, David, and raised it, this lamb, David, raised it. So Samuel raised it to being a ram, right, like a king, and leader of the sheep instead of that ram. So this is raising up David instead of Saul. So again, raised it to being a ram and a leader of the sheep instead of that ram which had forsaken its glory. And it went to it and spake to it alone, and raised it to being a ram, and made it a prince and leader of the sheep. Right, so this is Samuel anointing David to be the eventual king. But right here, but during all these things, those dogs oppressed the sheep. And the first ram pursued that second ram. So this is amazing. This is all of it. This is all of history told in one dream, or all the highlights of history told in one dream. So this is Saul wanting to kill David over jealousy. Jealousy and this evil spirit that plagued Saul. And that first ram pursued that second ram, so Saul pursued David, and that second ram arose and fled before it. And I saw till those dogs pulled down the first ram. So this is when Saul was killed. And that second ram arose and led the little sheep. And those sheep grew and multiplied, but all the dogs and foxes and wild boars feared and fled before it. So this is them fearing before David. And that ram butted and killed the wild beasts, and those wild beasts had no longer any power among the sheep, and robbed them no more of aught. And this is also interesting because we know when David was younger, he actually was able to kill wild beasts. He killed killed a bear and a lion. So interesting, right? So it says here, and that ram butted and killed the wild beasts, and those wild beasts had no longer any power amongst the sheep, and robbed them no more of aught. But this is obviously talking about the other nations, but it is an interesting parallel. And that ram begat many sheep, and fell asleep. And this is David dying. And a little sheep, Solomon, became a ram in its stead, and became a prince and leader of those sheep. And that house became great and broad. So this is the building of the actual house. And it was built for those sheep. And a tower, lofty and great, was built on the house for Yahweh of the sheep. And that house was low, but the tower was elevated and lofty. And Yahweh of the sheep stood on that tower, and they offered a full table before him. So this is the time of prosperity and righteousness of David and Solomon. And again, I saw those sheep that they had erred, and went many ways. So this is the time when Solomon fell, and the kingdom started to be divided, and people went astray, and forsook that their house. And Yahweh of the sheep called some from among the sheep, and sent them to the sheep. This is him calling prophets, right? To send them to the sheep. But the sheep began to slay them. And one of them was saved and was not slain. This is Eliyahu. And one of them was saved and was not slain. And it sped away and cried aloud over the sheep. And they sought to slay it, but Yahweh of the sheep saved it from the sheep, and brought it up to me, and caused it to dwell there. So this is Elijah going up into heaven. And many other sheep he sent to those sheep to testify unto them, and to lament over them. This is more prophets. And after that, I saw that when they forsook the house of Yahweh and his tower, they fell away entirely, and their eyes were blinded. And I saw the Adonai of that sheep, how he wrought much slaughter amongst them, their herds, until those sheep invited that slaughter and betrayed his place. Right. So this is This is the devastation of the kingdoms. And he gave them over into the hands of the lions and tigers. This is the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians, and I don't know who the hyenas are, into the hands of the foxes and all the wild beasts. And those wild beasts began to tear in pieces those sheep. And I saw that he had forsook their house and their tower, and gave them all into the hand of the lions, to tear and to devour them, into the hand of all the wild beasts. And I began to cry with all my power, and to appeal to Yahweh of the sheep, and to represent to him in regard to the sheep, that they were devoured by all the wild beasts. But he remained unmoved, though he saw it, and rejoiced that they were devoured and swallowed and robbed, and left them to be devoured in the hand of all the wild beasts. And he called 70 shepherds, and cast those sheep to them, that they might pasture them. So this is really the only part I don't understand fully of this dream vision. I do believe these 70 shepherds are the other nations where the Israelites were taken into captivity. So they were basically put in their care. Into Assyria and into Babylon, right? So he put them in their trust and cast those sheep to them, right? So he cast them. Like this is like dispersion. He cast those sheep to them, that they might pasture them. And he spake to the shepherds and their companions, let each individual of you pasture the sheep henceforward, and everything that I shall command you that you do, and I will deliver them over unto you duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy ye. That kind of rings true with in the book of Jeremiah we saw, and in the book of Baruch, second Baruch, we saw how Nebuchadnezzar had known beforehand, like, to protect people like Jeremiah and other righteous men, but he also knew certain were to be destroyed. And he gave over unto them those sheep. And he called another and spake unto him, observe and mark everything that the shepherds will do to those sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded them. Right? So they were given a certain amount or number to be destroyed, but we know that they became wicked and they destroyed more. And every excess and the destruction which will be wrought through the shepherds record, namely, how many they destroy according to my command, and how many according to their own caprice, their own desire, their own will. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects, and read out before me by number how many they destroy, and how many they deliver over for destruction, that I may have this as a testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, that I may comprehend and see what they do, whether or not they abide by my command which I have commanded them. But they shall not know it, and thou shalt not declare it to them, nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds effect, each in its time, and lay it all before me. And I saw till those shepherds had pastured in their season, and they began to slay and to destroy more than they were bidden, and they delivered those sheep into the hand of the lions, and the lions and tigers eat and devour the greater part of those sheep, and the wild boars eat along with them. And they burnt that tower and demolished that house. And I became exceedingly sorrowful over that tower, because that house of the sheep was demolished, right? So this is Babylon destroying Jerusalem and destroying the temple. And afterward, I was unable to see if those sheep entered that house. And the shepherds and their associates delivered over those sheep to all the wild beasts to devour them, and each one of them received in his time a definite number. It was written by the other in a book how many each of them destroyed of them. And each one slew and destroyed many more than was prescribed. And I began to weep and lament on account of those sheep. And thus in the vision I saw that one who wrote, how he wrote down every one that was destroyed by those shepherds day by day, and carried up and laid down, and showed actually the whole book to Yahweh of the sheep, even everything that they had done, and all that each one of them had made away with, and all that they had given over to destruction. And the book was read before Yahweh of the sheep, and he took the book from his hand, and read it, and sealed it, and laid it down. And forthwith I saw how the shepherds pastured for 12 hours, and behold, 3 of those sheep turned back, and came and entered, and began to build up the house that had fallen down. So this is the time of Nehemiah, Ezra, Zerubbabel, right, building the house back. But the wild boars tried to hinder them, but they were not able. This is definitely the time of Ezra, and they were recording how other nations were trying to hinder them from rebuilding the wall. And they began again to build as before, and they reared up that tower, and it was named the High Tower. And they began again to place a table before the tower, right? But all the bread on it was polluted and not pure, so nothing was the way it was supposed to be. And as touching all this, the eyes of those sheep were blinded so that they saw not, and the eyes thereof the shepherds likewise. And they delivered them in large numbers to their shepherds for destruction, and they trampled the sheep with their feet and devoured them. And Yahuwah the sheep remained unmoved till all the sheep were dispersed over the field and mingled with them, i.e. the beasts, and the shepherds did not save them out of the hand of the beasts. And this one who wrote the book carried it up and showed it and read before Yahuwah the sheep, and implored him on their account and besought him on their account, as he showed him all the doings of the shepherds, and gave testimony before him against all the shepherds. And he took the actual book and laid it beside him and departed. And I saw, this is chapter 90, and I saw till that, and by the way, the chapters in the R.H. Charles version and Enoch and the CEPHER version are a little different starting around here. And I saw till that in this manner 35 shepherds undertook the pasturing of the sheep, and they severally completed their periods as the first, and others received them into their hands to pasture them for their period, each shepherd in his own period. And after that I saw in my vision all the birds of heaven coming, the eagles, the vultures, the kites, the ravens. But the eagles led all the birds, and they began to devour those sheep, and to pick out their eyes and to devour their flesh. I believe this is the time of the Greeks and the Romans just desecrating these people. And the sheep cried out because their flesh was being devoured by the birds. And as for me, I looked and lamented in my sleep over that shepherd who pastured the sheep. And I saw until those sheep were devoured by the dogs and eagles and kites, and they left neither flesh nor sinew remaining on them, till only their bones stood there. And their bones too fell to the earth, and the sheep became few. And I saw until that 23 had undertaken the pasturing and completed their several periods 58 times. But behold, lambs were born by those white sheep, and they began to open their eyes and to see. Now this is the time of the Maccabees, and to cry to those sheep. Yea, they cried to them, but they did not hearken to what they had said to them, but were exceeding deaf, and their eyes were very exceedingly blinded. And I saw in the vision how the ravens flew upon those lambs, and took one of those lambs, and dashed the sheep in pieces, and devoured them. And I saw till horns grew upon those lambs, and the ravens cast down their horns. And I saw till there sprouted a great horn of one of those sheep, and their eyes were opened. And it looked at them, and their eyes opened, and it cried to the sheep, and the rams saw it and ran to it. And notwithstanding all this, those eagles and vultures and ravens and kites still kept tearing the sheep and swooping down upon them and devouring them. Still the sheep remained silent, but the rams lamented and cried out, and those ravens fought and battled with it and sought to lay low its horn, but they had no power over it. And I saw till the shepherds and eagles and those vultures and kites came. They cried to the ravens that they should break the horn of that ram. And they battled and fought with it, and battled with them, and cried that it help may come. And I saw till a great sword was given to the sheep. And the sheep proceeded against all the beasts of the field to slay them, and all the beasts and the birds of the heaven fled before their face. And I saw till that man who wrote down the names of the shepherds and carried up into the presence of Yahuwah the sheep came and helped it and showed it everything. He had come down for the help of that ram. And I saw till the Adonai of the sheep came unto them in wrath, and all who saw him fled, and they all fell into his shadow from before his face. So this is, I believe, this is the return of Messiah Yahusha, right? It says, I saw till that man who wrote down the names of the shepherds. This is, I believe, the word of Yahuwah, right? And I saw till now this is the judgment. And I saw till a throne was erected in the pleasant land, and Yahuwah the sheep sat himself thereon, and the other took the sealed books and opened these books before Yahuwah of the sheep. So this is Messiah Yahusha unsealing the books, right? and Yahuwah called those men, those 7 first white ones, and commanded them that they should bring before him, beginning with the first star, Satan, which led the way, all the stars whose the 200 watchers, all the stars whose privy members were like those of horses, and they brought them before him. And he said to the man who wrote before him, being one of those 7 white ones, said to him, this is Enoch, right? One of those first 7. This is the lineage from Adam to Enoch, and Enoch was one of those 7, right? Take those 70 shepherds whom I delivered to the sheep, who, taking them on their own authority, slew more than I commanded them. And behold, they were all bound. I saw, and they all stood before him, and the judgment was held first over the stars, and they were judged and found guilty, and went to the place of condemnation, and they were cast into an abyss full of fire and of flaming. This is hell. Gehenna. Full of fire and flaming, full of pillars of fire. And those 70 shepherds were judged and found guilty, and they were cast into that fiery abyss. And I saw at that time how a like abyss was opened in the midst of the earth, full of fire, and they brought those blinded sheep, and they were all judged and found guilty. This is the wicked, and cast in this fiery abyss, and they burned. Now this abyss was to the right of that house, and I saw those sheep burning, and their bones burning. And I stood up to see till they folded up that old house and carried off all the pillars, and all the beams and ornaments of the house were at the same time folded up with it, and they carried it off and laid it in the place in the south of the land. And I saw till the Adonai of the sheep brought a new house greater and loftier than the first, and set it up in the place of the first which had been folded up, and all its pillars were new, and its ornaments were new, and larger than that of those of the first. And the old one which he had taken away, and all the sheep were within it. And I saw all the sheep which had been left, and all the beasts on the earth, and all the birds of the heaven, falling down and doing homage to those sheep, and making petition to and obeying them in everything. This is the millennial reign. And thereafter those 3 who were clothed in white, this is the angels, and had seized me by my hand, and who had taken me up before, and the hand of that ram also seizing hold of me, they took me up and set me down in the midst of those sheep before the judgment took place. And those sheep were all white, and their wool was abundant and clean, and all that had been destroyed and dispersed, and all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the heaven assembled in that house. And Yahweh of the sheep rejoiced with great joy, because they were all good and had returned to his house. And I saw till they laid down that sword which had been given to the sheep, and they brought it back into the house, and it was sealed before the presence of Yahweh, and all the sheep were invited into that house, but it held them not. And the eyes of all them were opened, and they saw the good, and there was not one among them that did not see. So they are all righteous, and they all had understanding. And I saw that house was large and broad and very full. And I saw that a white bull was born with large horns, and all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air feared him and made petition to him all the time. Right? This is Yahusha, Messiah. And I saw till all their generation were transformed, and all they became white bulls, and the first among them became a lamb, and that lamb became a great animal, and had great black horns on its head, and the Adonai of the sheep rejoiced over it and over all the oxen. And I slept in their midst, and I awoke and saw everything. This is the vision which I saw while I slept, and I awoke and blessed Yahweh of righteousness and gave him glory. Then I wept with a great weeping, and my tears stayed not until I could no longer endure it. When I saw it, they flowed on account of what I had seen. For everything shall come and be fulfilled, and all the deeds of men in their order were shown to me. On that night I remembered the first dream, and because of it I wept and was troubled, because I had seen that vision. And there is the end of chapter 91, and that is actually where we're going to stop, brothers and sisters. So I pray this reading was a blessing for you, and I think it's absolutely fascinating and amazing, and such a testimony of the sovereignty and the majesty and the wisdom and the all-knowing of our Creator, Yahweh Sebaoth, who he created us through. Of course, as the scriptures say, all things were created by him and through the word, through Yahusha. So what an amazing, amazing read.